Hare Krishna. Om Jnanatimirandhasya Jnananjana Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Nama Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Prishthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swami iti namine. Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine Vancha Kalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shrivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna. So there is a request from Chaitanya Charan Prabhu side. Prabhuji has requested that any one of you in between, if you want to ask questions, Prabhuji will be speaking now. In between, anyone has any doubts or question, you can write it and send it here. If you want, Prabhu will type those questions and send it across by typing to Prabhuji. And Chaitanya Charan will read that and he will answer the next question. Okay? You will keep hearing. In between, if you get questions, you want to ask questions, please write down and pass it here to Kriti Gopal Prabhu. Okay? So let's welcome Mr. Chaitanya Charan Prabhu for an amazing session on faith and doubt on science and scientists. The three times Prabhu is chanting.
So, question: in science, everything is proven by experiments. So, it's looking as faith increasable fact when a new thing is proven. So the question is that because science proves things by experiments, so what is thought of as faith earlier becomes a fact. Answer: firstly, not everything is proven through experiments in science. This is a common misconception about the methodology approach adopted by science. There are three broad ways or three forms of reasoning that science uses for learning about the world. They can be called as deduction, induction, and abduction. Deduction is mathematics. So now deduction is the most reliable way of acquiring knowledge within the scientific method. So for example, 3 plus 3 is through deductive mathematics, algebra, we know it is 6, or 7 into 5 is 35. This is consistently true. It is almost like axiomatic in science. Now, very little of the real world can actually be known through deduction. The more common method that is used is induction. Induction means science observes certain patterns in nature around us, then based on those patterns tries to come up with some theories which explain those patterns, which attempt to explain those patterns, and then to check those theories it sets up experiments, and when those experiments are turned out to be successful, then it is said that the theory has come out to be correct. So with respect to, say, the law of gravity, now Newton observed a fruit falling. Now most people would have just picked up the fruit and eaten it, and that would have been the end of the story. But Newton thought, why did the fruit fall? So from the observation he tried to come up with a theory, and from that theory came the theory of law of gravity, then theory of gravity, which later became a law. So there's an experiment. Okay, there's only this particular fruit fall, or other things also fall. So when the same principle is repeatedly observed, say for 100 times or 1,000 times, then by induction is the logic which says that, okay, if if x is true from 1 to n, then it will also be true from n plus 1 to infinity. Now, this is not necessarily true, but induction is the method by which science operates most of the time. Later on, if another question comes, I will talk about the problems with induction. But induction is what you are referring to. That science makes a theory, at that time it's an article of faith, but when experiments are done, then those experiments, if they prove the theory, then it, as you're saying, it goes into facts, zone of facts. So first of all, what is thought of as a fact in science now may well turn out to be counterfactual in the future. So for example, Newton proposed the theory of gravity, which was later accepted as a law of gravity. So the difference between a theory and a law usually is in terms of its being verified, accepted, and especially mathematically expressed. So a law is usually mathematically expressed. Evolution is not mathematically expressible. Nobody can say that, okay, from this species after this much time with this much variable factors, this species will emerge. That's why it's a theory, it's not a law. So Newton's law was considered truth or fact for over 300 years. But at the turn of the last century, as science explored deeper into the microscopic world and further into the macroscopic world, in both zones, science found that Newton's laws don't apply. They don't apply for very small fundamental particles, and it does not apply over cosmic distances and for objects of cosmic sizes. So rather than by experiments, initially Newton's theory had been considered to be a law, but by subsequent experiments it was found that what was considered to be a fact is no longer a fact. So the result of this is that Newtonian physics, or what is now called as classical physics, is considered only a subset of physics that applies only to large objects at anthropic sizes. Anthropic means human or earth related sizes. So Newton's theory is no longer considered to be a universal fact. It does not apply for subatomic particles. It does not apply for cosmic objects, especially over vast distances. So it's not that by experiment some scientific truths are always proven to be true. Quite often their truth itself is found to be limited. That means, say yes, from 1 to n times a particular theory is proven to be true. But after that, when n plus 1 comes, if you have n plus from n to w, it is proven to be true. But after that, when y or z comes, it is again shown to be false. So the method of induction, how it works is, essentially we observe, suppose an ornithologist, a bird watcher, decided to observe the birds in the visual range. And say that person observed 50 birds in a garden and saw all birds that were there were blue. And now after that, based on observations, the ornithologist concluded that because for the last 3 weeks, from morning to evening, all the birds that I have observed were blue. So I come up with the theory, all birds in the universe are blue. Now this is the blue bird theory. And then, so 100 birds have been observed. The 101st turns out to be true, to be also blue. So theory confirmed. 105th also comes out to be blue. Theory further confirmed. 110th comes out to be blue. Theory confirmed beyond doubt. Now 111th bird turns out to be black. Then what happens? Bad data. 112th comes out black. Again bad data. And then 115th comes out black. We are on the verge of a new breakthrough. So often what is called as a breakthrough in science is a breakdown of the previous theory. A breakthrough is often a breakdown of the previous theory. And then say for the next 50 birds that are observed, they all turn out to be black. Then after that, among the next 30 birds, some are white, some are black, some are blue. So in this way, by the time 200 birds are observed, we have scientists proposing a new integrated theory. This is the integrated bird theory. All birds in the universe are either black or blue. And then again this theory is confirmed by 201st, 210th, 215th, 220th bird observed. And then when the 221st bird comes, then it's a green bird. And then what happens? Bad data. Bad data. Again, 225th bird is again green, more bad data. 230th bird is green. We are on the verge of a new breakthrough in science now. So the point which I am making is induction can never give us definitive knowledge. The purpose of my giving this example of birds is not to caricature or criticize science. It is to objectively point out the limitation in an intelligible example. So induction does not always prove faith to be facts. In fact, sometimes what is considered to be a fact is later on proven to be an article of faith. So what was considered to be right may later on be turned out to be wrong. So there was this famous debate between Einstein on one side and Max Planck, Niels Bohr and other quantum physicists on the other side. So Einstein said that God does not play dice with the universe. And because he did not like the idea of quantum physics, which had everything based on probability and no objective reality. So then the quantum physicist opposed to him replied, don't tell God what he can do. So science in itself does not always confirm the theories which it proposes. It often disproves it. So that itself is not correct. That faith will be proven as right as facts by subsequent experiments. But more importantly, when it comes to spiritual knowledge, we have to understand that science, when it comes to origins, it cannot use induction. There it uses a third method called as abduction. Now normally we refer to abduction as meaning kidnapping. But actually abduction is a particular form of reasoning which refers to IBE. IBE is inference to best explanation. That means if scientists want to propose, say, anything about the very remote or distant past, how did the universe come about? How did the first life form come about? How did the first human being come about? Now these are not events about which scientists can do any experiments for replicating. We cannot, if scientists say that the universe has come by a big bang, they cannot trigger off a big bang by which they will produce a new universe. So what to speak of doing repeated experiments when it comes to questions of the remote history and especially question of origins? Scientists cannot even do one experiment to repeat it. So it's just not possible to replicate through experiments. So then how is scientific knowledge acquired in such cases? It is acquired through what is called as inference to best explanation, IBE, or abduction. Now essentially abductive reasoning is basically like an investigator trying to investigate a crime. So suppose in a house a man has been found murdered. The investigators will come over there and they will check out. Now how was this person murdered? Now they cannot repeat the scenario. They can't tell the murderer, please, we want you to demonstrate how you did it so that we can arrest you. No murderer will do that. So then they find out, okay, we knew that morning 3 o'clock or afternoon 3 o'clock, a friend went to meet. At that time this person was healthy. That's fine, healthy, okay. And 9 o'clock, when his wife went to the room, she found that there was a corpse over there. And she immediately informed the police. Then, now they don't have, they may not have cameras in the room to check who actually killed him. Now they may have cameras at the entrance of the house. And they may find between 3 o'clock to 9 o'clock, there are 3 people who came there. One of them was a small girl. Another was a 80-year-old woman. So neither of them would have had the strength to stab this man and kill him. A third was an old friend of this person who had come. So now logically they would say that, okay, these 2 are unlikely kind of suspects. So the third will be the main suspect. And then they may say that, 2 days ago some other friends heard that these 2 had a very heated argument. Now that may increase the suspicion, or maybe this person did it. So basically here there are no experiments possible. And all that investigative researchers can do is come to a best explanation by pointing out the implausibility of other explanations. So a 6-year-old girl will not have the strength to stab this man. A 80-year-old woman will not have the agility. So it was probably this friend. Now the inference to best explanation is never reliable. It is just the best among more unlikely explanations, or rather it is the least unlikely among possible explanations. So now, for example, if the investigators don't know that same house has some trap door under a cupboard or inside a closet, and the murderer had come through the trap door, opened the door, sneaked in on the unsuspecting victim and stabbed him, and then went out the same trap door. So now, because the investigators did not know about the trapdoor, their inference to a best explanation may well turn out to be wrong. So when science investigates about origins, science does not have any avenue for doing experiments. And all it can do is use abductive reasoning to infer to a best explanation. And that's why that is not a very reliable method. So often we make the mistake of thinking of all science to be equally authoritative. That means if we think that science is so phenomenally accurate that I just type some text on my phone here in India, and within a moment that message goes to my project guide in America. Wow, this is phenomenal. Science works brilliantly, and therefore if scientists give us theories about how humans came, from where humans came, from where life came, from where universe came, that must also be true. But that's not necessarily the case, because the two are not necessarily adopted using this. So scientific theory about, say, electromagnetism or gravity or quantum physics, there are many experiments done to verify this. But with respect to scientific theories about origins, there are practically no experiments done. So all science does not have equal credibility. And when science speaks about origins, it often speaks in a highly speculative way. And there are very little experiments that are possible to conclude anything tangible. And especially if you see further, when it goes to the origin of the universe or the origin of life, we with science have very little sample on which to make an inference also. I talked about inference to best explanation. So if suppose the investigators could investigate only half of the room, and they in the murder case they could investigate only half of the room, and they did not have access to the other half of the room, then they would not know whether there is a door over there, did the murderer come from there. So with respect to science, with respect to current existence, science may be able to do many experiments. But with respect to distant past, science has to make huge inferences based on very small samples. With respect to even our best sensors, reliably, how much can science study in terms of space, the earth and the solar system in its vicinity? And with respect to time, maybe a few hundred years in the past, science has got reliable data. But in terms of length, in terms of dimension, space, the universe is far, far bigger. And in terms of longevity, the universe has been around for thousands and millions of years. So that's why when science extrapolates from a very small sample of a few thousand miles around the earth and a few hundred years into the past, from there to millions and billions of miles and to millions and millions of years, then it's a huge extrapolation from a tiny sample. And that is not valid. It is often questionable. So an example to illustrate this is, suppose archaeologists came across some under the earth, some debris, some remains of an ancient house. And then they found a blue colored brick over there. Now from that, if the archaeologists concluded that there was a civilization over here and all the people in the civilization lived in houses which were colored blue, made of blue bricks. Let's say, wait a minute. Now, from one blue brick, how can you make a statement about a whole civilization's housing fashions? Now, who knows? That blue brick might be some toy of some girl, baby girl, in one house, and that might not have been used at all for construction. So, the point which I am making is, from a small sample, when we make a huge generalization, it is often likely to be unreliable. And science, despite its phenomenal precision with respect to the universe as it exists now, when science goes to origins, it has a very small sample by which to arrive at answers. And that's why its answers are not very reliable. And that's why, with respect to theories of origins, the theories often keep changing. There's a prominent, one of the world's most prominent physicists is John Wheeler. So once when he was teaching a physics course, one of his students said, "Sir, there are so many cosmological theories. So it's difficult to stay aware of all the many different theories that are postulated." So John Wheeler, he replied in a typical materialistic joke. He said, if you miss a bus, a cosmological theory, or a girl, don't run after it, because in a few minutes another one is coming. So here there is a prominent physicist. He himself admits that cosmological theories are very fickle because they are based on a huge extra generalization from a very small sample. And that's why we should not consider that scientific answers about origins have as much reliability as scientific technology, which is based on hundreds and thousands of experiments done based on the universe as it exists now. So it is not that all science, its theories can be experimented with, and it's not that all theories, when experimented with, the faith turns into facts. In fact, some experiments may turn facts into faith also. So thank you. Okay. So question is, in the Vedas, it is in the creation of God, we say that everything is produced in a hypothetical way. For them, there was no proof of example. So for example, Shatarupa is said to have come from Brahma's beard and Manu came from Brahma's body. But in science, every principle is proven by experiments, otherwise it is not followed. Nor are the principles of the problems would have been proposed in science, saying that already we did explain some of the principles experimentally, and now trust on ourselves what we are saying. What is your comment on this? Again, this is not science universal methodology. The question is basically, science does experiments for everything, whereas scripture just gives direct explanations. No, science, as I said, doesn't experiment with everything, especially with origins. Science doesn't experiment. It can't offer any experiments. And even if some experiments are done, they can be done only with fragmental replications of the primeval conditions. So we can't replicate the full universe. So that's the first point. Now with respect to scripture offers us two different kinds of knowledge. So there is, if you envision scriptural knowledge as three circles, if you envision three circles, scriptural knowledge you can divide into three sectors. In those three sectors, has anyone shown you this PowerPoint of the three divisions of scriptural knowledge in any of your earlier classes? Okay, if you're not seen, I am just sharing my screen. I'll show it to you in a minute. Are you able to see anything, Kirti Gopal Prabhu? The screen? Okay, while I set this up. Okay, can you see now? Something? Okay. Can you still see or now you can't see? Okay. Was it clear first time when you saw it or it was not clear? Okay. I had sent the same PPT by email to you. Do you have that email? No, I had sent it yesterday, yesterday only after the class. Okay, anyway, I'm sharing the screen once again. Let's hope you can see it now properly. Okay. Yeah. Is it perceivable now? Okay. Okay, so here you will see that. So, when scripture gives us some knowledge, that scriptural knowledge can be divided into three categories: that which agrees with science, that which contradicts science, and that which transcends science. So, for example, scripture may give us certain knowledge about how there is consciousness coming from a non-material source, and there is increasing scientific evidence that is being found to support this conclusion. This is an example of, say, the existence of soul being increasingly proven by science. Or scripture has, say, for example, Vedic mathematics, where the same principles of mathematics are given, but they are given in a way that are much more easier to calculate and use. So sometimes scripture gives us knowledge that agrees with science. Then sometimes scripture may give us knowledge that contradicts science. And thirdly, scripture gives us knowledge that transcends science. So transcend science means that, for example, if scripture says that God is a blue complexion cowherd boy who lives in the highest spiritual planet called Golok Vrindavan. Now science has neither any way to prove or disprove it. This is knowledge that just goes beyond the scope of science. It transcends science. Now when we study scripture, our primary purpose is to get the knowledge in scripture that transcends science. The knowledge about our origin, the knowledge about our purpose, why we live, what is our ultimate destination. This is the knowledge that we learn from scripture. And that should always be our primary purpose. And when we have this purpose in mind clearly, then we won't get sidetracked by other forms of knowledge from scripture. So other forms of knowledge are given, but they are not the primary purpose of scripture. The primary purpose of scripture is to help us elevate our consciousness, to purify ourselves, to attain God. So now with respect to this knowledge, scripture does offer us an opportunity for experimentation. That means if scripture says that by chanting Hare Krishna, by remembering Krishna, we will become purified. Now this is something which all of us can experiment, and Krishna's approach in the Bhagavad Gita is also invitational and experimental. He says in 9.2, Pratyaksha-vagamam dharmyam susukham kartum avyayam. This is Pratyaksha-vagamam dharmyam. That by direct experience you can understand this to be true. So when Krishna shares the spiritual knowledge, he says that you follow this process and you will get this result. And that is something which each of us can experience in the laboratory of our own consciousness. So anybody who practices the process of Bhakti Yoga can experience the anarthas going down, can experience the process of Bhakti working, attraction to Krishna increasing. So with respect to experiments, yes, scripture does offer us experiments. Bhakti Yoga does offer us the experiment with our own consciousness, within our own heart. And by exposing ourselves to spiritual sound vibration and by regulating our exposure to material phenomena, we can raise our consciousness and experience higher reality. So with respect to scripture's material knowledge, for example, how Brahma appeared, how Manu appeared, how Shatarupa appeared. Yes, scripture may not offer us any experiments for doing that, but those are not talking about universal principles that are immediately relevant to us. Those are about ancient events that happened long ago. And the purpose of that information is not to directly contribute to our purifications. That is historical information. And just as even science cannot offer experiments for historical information because historical events have already happened and gone and done. So even science cannot offer us to do an experiment to say that, say if Hitler had not attacked Russia during the Second World War, now would Hitler have been able to conquer all of Europe and rest of the world? No, that event has happened once and it's over. So similarly, when scripture offers knowledge about history, with history we cannot do experiments. It's an event which has happened one time and it's over. But scripture does offer us the opportunity to experiment with respect to its knowledge that transcends science, with the knowledge of the inner transformation and purification in the laboratory of our own heart. So in that sense, scripture is experimental, but that experiment is within our own heart as experience. So scriptural science is experiential. Any other questions about this till now?
Any other questions? Ask about this one.
Okay. Here I have one more question. You can type the questions, till then I'll take the other questions. So, yeah. So in the Vedas, everything is about result, not experiment. And it is said that do not think of anything created by God in this world, only think of aim. Is this not confinement of mind in spite of being engineering student? Answer: nowhere does the Bhagavad Gita say don't think about the world, think only about God. It only says don't think about the world independent of God. It says don't think about the world as disconnected from God. In fact, in the Bhagavad Gita, again and again, Krishna helps us see him in the world. In the 10th chapter is Vibhuti Yoga. Vibhuti Yoga means Krishna says the universal principle that in 10.41 in the Gita, Yad yad vibhuti matsattvam shrimadurjitam evama tattadevavagachatvam mama tejomsha sambhava. Krishna says that know that all opulent, beautiful and glorious creations spring from but a spark of my splendor. So what Krishna is saying here is that when we see anything wonderful in this world, don't think that it is wonderful on its own. Think that it is wonderful based on, because it manifests Krishna's opulence. So a rose is very exquisitely beautiful. How did its beauty come about? It is by Krishna's arrangement. It is a spark of Krishna's beauty manifesting in this world. The science reveals to us a magnificently designed universe with laws of mathematical precision. Now, what do we see by this? As Srinivasa Ramanujan, India's famous mathematician, he said that an equation for me has no meaning unless it represents the thought of God. So, again, what is being done is here, we see the star, we see the creation, but we see it in such a way that we connect it with the Creator. So, as engineering students, certainly nobody is telling that you should not do engineering studies. But the point is, we use our knowledge of philosophy coming from the Bhagavad Gita to see our subjects in a God-connected way. That means, if we can with a cell phone send message immediately in one moment from one part of the world to another, we can get dazzled by science, or we can get attracted towards the supreme scientist. Now, yes, science has dazzling technology in terms of how by just clicking a few buttons, a message can go immediately over millions of miles, thousands of miles, hundreds of miles, whatever. But the point is, science uses mechanisms that are pre-existing in nature. We may use telecommunications for communicating from here to, I may communicate from Australia to India now, to Pune. But now when we are doing this, the mechanisms for this are only discovered by science. They are not created by science. They have been, where have they originally come from? So even in the wonder of technology, a devotee can see the wonder of God. What I mean by this is, suppose there is a tribal who doesn't know anything about agriculture or horticulture or any kind of systematic growing of plants, vegetables, fruits. And he comes to a fruit farmer who has got an orchard. And then he observes this fruit farmer, and then when a mango is produced on a tree, he eats the mango and is amazed and he says, Hare, yeah, oh my God, this farmer has done a miracle. He has converted mud into mango. Now, has the farmer done that? The farmer, first of all, did not create the mango seed. The farmer did not create the mechanism by which the mango seed would transform into a mango tree and give fruits. What the farmer did was used pre-existing resources and pre-existing mechanisms and just allowed and provided a conducive environment for them to provide a result, produce a result. So pre-existing resource was the mango seed. Pre-existing mechanism is the mechanism within the mango seed to eventually fructify and produce a tree. So now certainly the farmer has done hard work in maintaining the mango orchard, and that for that credit should be given. But it is not that the farmer has produced a mango from nothing. The farmer has tapped pre-existing mechanisms. And similarly, when science say offers us instant messaging or instant communication, now this is largely done, first of all, using semiconductor effect in electronic chips. Now the question comes up, science did not make semiconductors. Now some elements are some things are conductors, some are insulators. Why are some semiconductors? So science did not make that. The semiconductor effect, which is fundamentally required for telecommunications, that already existed in nature. That was only tapped by science. Similarly, the mechanism for transmitting electromagnetic waves through the atmosphere, specifically the ionosphere, that mechanism is also not created by science. That mechanism already existed in nature, and science tapped that mechanism. So certainly the level of tapping that is done by science in developing electronics communication or telecommunication, that is much more sophisticated than a farmer's tapping when the farmer raises some trees. So the scientists definitely need to be given credit for the sophistication of their methods of tapping. But still we need to remember that the mechanisms and the resources were not created by science. So even in the magnificence of technology, a devotee, a bhakti yogi can see the magnificence of God. So it is not that if we become devotees, we don't care for the creation at all and only think about God. No, we think about the creation as connected with the Creator, as manifesting the glory of the Creator. And when we become more informed in the philosophy of Bhakti Yoga, then even in science, we will be able to see the magnificent hand of God. And we'll be able to understand how the whole of science works, not just because of human brilliance, but also because of God's prearrangement. So human science, I'll conclude with this point, human science rests on divine prescience. Prescience means the foresight, the wisdom in advance. So God in advance has created nature as permeated with many different mechanisms. And then science discovers those mechanisms and taps those mechanisms. So we can see the glory of human science, and in the glory of human science, we can see divine prescience. And in that way, prescience means foresight. And in that way, we can dovetail even our engineering study in connection with our bhakti yoga. So it's not that we have to stop thinking about the world and think only about God. We don't think of the world as an independent reality having nothing to do with God, but rather we see the world and its wonderful mechanisms as manifesting the glory of God. Thank you. Question: is science not required to show this modern ignorant society that that the Vedas are indeed true and scriptures have correctly talked about the material world, because at present people need practical proofs to put faith in the Vedas? Answer: yes, people do need practical proofs, and science primarily deals with study of matter, and scripture also gives us material knowledge, but scripture's primary contribution is spiritual knowledge. We study scripture primarily for becoming better human beings, for learning how to live more fruitfully, more harmoniously, more happily. This knowledge science cannot provide. So it is, rather than focusing on science need for proving the practical utility of scripture, we can actually demonstrate the practical utility of scripture by the values it offers, by the transformation it offers in our own life. See, for example, I said that science knowledge about origins is very shaky, very speculative. Similarly, science does not offer us any knowledge about values. Science does not offer us any knowledge about purpose. Values means what is right, what is wrong. Suppose, say you have an aunt who is now 85 years old and she has left her inheritance in your name. Now, if you just go to visit her, one day in her morning tea, you can just put some arsenic, and by afternoon, all that inheritance will be yours. Now, science can tell you that if you put arsenic, she will die. But science cannot tell you whether you should put arsenic or not. Most scientists may not do this. Most scientists may not do this, but if they don't do it, it's not because of their science. It's because of the values that they have independent of science. Now, Einstein famously said that we can talk about the moral foundation of science, but we cannot talk about the scientific foundation of morality. I repeat, Einstein said that we can talk about the moral foundation of science. That means whether science should be used morally or immorally. We can talk about how people should use science morally. We can talk about the moral foundation of science, but we cannot talk about the scientific foundation of morality. That means science can help us to make an atom bomb or a nuclear bomb by which a whole city can be destroyed. But science cannot tell us whether a city should be destroyed or not destroyed. Whether destroying a city is right or wrong, that science cannot tell us. For that, we need values which come from a separate source. And that source of values, the most reliable such source is scripture. So, if we study scripture and scripture brings about practical transformation in our lives in terms of helping us to become better human beings. A simple example to illustrate this now. Most of us understand that anger is undesirable. And yet, with all our sophisticated technology, there is practically no medicine for curing anger. No, there is nowhere in the world that as soon as you start feeling angry, just pop this pill into your mouth, all your anger will go away. It doesn't work like that. Now our emotions are so vital to our being, and yet, what can science offer? Science can offer us sedatives, by which sometimes in some mental asylums, if some patient becomes very wild, then they give a sedative injection, by which the patient just goes to sleep. But by that the anger is not removed. When the person wakes up, probably the anger is still there again. So the point is, the inner transformation is not offered by science. And spirituality offers us that inner transformation. So we don't necessarily need science to demonstrate the truth of scripture. What we need is an adventurous heart, ready to experiment. Yes, if scripture says that if I practice bhakti yoga, then my heart will be transformed. That my greed, my anger, my depression, my irritation, my negativity, my self-pity, my inferiority complex, these things will go down. I will become better. I will become happier. And this is something which science cannot offer us very easily. Science cannot help us to control anger. There is no happiness pill. Oh, you are feeling unhappy, just take a pill and you will become happy. There are some antidepressant pills which make people, help them to counter depression a little bit. But those antidepressant pills have only limited utility. After some time, they don't work. So, the primary way to understand ourselves the validity of scripture and to share that validity with others is to experiment in the laboratory of our own consciousness and share that wisdom with others. Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, I got some questions here. Okay. Hare Krishna. I got the question. I think you sent it in the Zoom chat. I'll take the questions one by one. Okay? Thank you. The question is, physical laws may have some errors due to error in observation due to imperfect senses. How can we find error in mathematics as no sense is involved? As mathematical theorems don't change, so can they said to be absolute? Answer, yes. Since the time of Euclid, who was a famous Greek mathematician, mathematics has often been considered to be a very pure form of knowledge. And mathematical theorems have been considered to be absolute truths. But as science has become more and more sophisticated, then it has found that even mathematical theorems are no longer absolute truths. For example, now there is a whole genre called non-Euclidean geometry, where Euclidean principles don't apply. For example, it is said that the three angles of a triangle, their sum will be 180 degrees. This is considered to be like a fundamental principle in geometry. And it has stood the test of time for a long time. But if this same principle is applied to a triangle that is not on a flat surface, but it is on a sphere, then if a triangle is drawn on a sphere, the angles of that triangle won't summarize to 180 degrees because they will all go in different directions. So that means Euclidean geometry, which is considered to be like one of the fundamental truths, it does not apply if it does not hold true universally. And there are many, this is just a simple example. I'll have to go into such technicality in mathematics that it will not be easy to understand it. So I won't go into that. But the point is, there have been, as mathematics has become more abstract, as science has become more refined, more complex, so it has been found that many of the mathematical theorems are also not absolute in their scope. Gödel's incompleteness theorem is also a famous theorem which talks about how that the implications of Gödel's incompleteness theorem are many. And again, it will be a whole class in itself, what the theorem is and what its implications are. But suffice it to say, there are many experiments which do show that mathematics is not an absolute source of knowledge, because even mathematics operates, even the principles of mathematics operate on certain presumptions. And those presumptions are often considered to be so obvious and so universal that they are not investigated. But if those presumptions are questioned, if those presumed conditions are changed, even mathematics does not remain an absolute source of knowledge. Thank you. Question: why does the soul require food as it is made of Sachitananda? Answer: the soul does not require food, the body requires food. The soul functions without any materials food for its sustenance. The soul is eternal and indestructible, but when the soul identifies with the body, then it has to function through the body. And for the functioning of the body, we need bodily energy. Just like the car driver does not need petrol, but the car needs petrol. So the fact that we can understand that the soul has energy even when the body is exhausted, from the fact that sometimes when our body is completely exhausted and we are very tired, say if you are fasting Nirjal from Sar Ekadashi or some other time, you are very exhausted and very hungry, very weak, and you fall asleep. So researchers have found that even when there is no bodily energy, still people have dreams. And often those dreams are very energetic. In that dream they may imagine, oh, I got food and I'm eating all the food. Or they may imagine I'm chasing some food, or I'm doing this, I'm doing that. So the energy for the dreams, that means the consciousness that is reflected in the dreams, that is coming from the soul through the subtle body. So the consciousness of the soul is not affected whether we eat food or not. But the body's capacity to function is affected whether there is bodily food or not. And because the soul's consciousness is attached to the body, so that is why the soul feels afflicted when there is no food. It does not mean that there is no food. It does not mean that the soul needs food, but it's because the soul is attached to the body and the soul's consciousness currently functions through the body, and body needs food. That's why we feel as if we are hungry. Thank you. Okay. Scientists are trying to experiment on Big Bang. Okay, sorry. Okay, we'll do one thing, because I'm not able to, whenever you say a question, I'm not able to hear it. So if you just post the question, I'll take it one by one. You just write the question and give, because I'm not able to hear when you speak the question. Okay. Question. Scientists are trying to experiment on Big Bang with Large Hadron Collider. They have also created few anti-atoms by colliding gold atoms at light speed. How can you explain this? Answer: yes. When I said that the question of origins is not experimentable, that does not mean nothing about origins can be experimented. What I meant is we cannot recreate the original conditions. So yes, through the particle accelerator, especially Large Hadron Collider, scientists are trying to recreate some conditions which are similar to the conditions present at the origin of the universe as postulated in the Big Bang cosmology. Now this, although this may help in some advancement of understanding of the past, but we have to understand this is a very small fraction. It's not that we can create a singularity. It's not that we can create the explosion of the singularity. What the Large Hadron Collider can do is recreate only a small part of the situation that existed at the time of the Big Bang. If the Big Bang is the way the universe came about, assuming that to be true also. So this does not mean that, just as going back to the whodunit investigative novel, research investigators may not be able to, they cannot create the whole crime condition of the past. But what they can do is, okay, if they find a trap door in a closet, and they can check, okay, who could have come through this trap door? If the trap door is so small and the prime suspect is a 6 feet 220 pound man, then they can very well say, okay, this person could not have come through this trap door, and therefore he is not the murderer. So certainly, just as in investigation also, detectives can recreate some of the conditions. So similarly, science can recreate some of the conditions from the ancient past, but they cannot recreate everything. And in that sense, the experiments about origins remain highly speculative. They are not recreations of the past, they are not simulations of the past, but they are only replications of a tentative conception of what the past might have been like. And that's why the scientific knowledge about the past always remains deductive. It does not remain inductive, it always remains abductive. It's always still an inference to best explanation. Thank you. Okay. Question. Science does not agree with ghosts, but often attributes to nervous breakdown, stress, depression, etc. Which one is true? Answer. Yes. It is not necessary that whenever a person has a nervous breakdown or whenever a person has any abnormal psychological behavior, it does not necessarily have to mean that that has been caused by ghosts. It can well have been caused by simply a breakdown of the neuronal mechanism of a person. So we have to understand two different things over here. Sometimes the natural and the supernatural explanations are thought of as contradictory, but they don't have to be contradictory. If in some cases the natural explanations are adequate, then they should be accepted as adequate. It's not that if, say for example, it's found that a particular person has habitual stress, and then it's found that there's a particular chemical that is short in a particular person. So then just provide that chemical, that problem will be solved. And where a natural explanation is available, natural explanation can be accepted. So it's not that all psychological problems have to be attributed to ghosts. In fact, Srila Prabhupada himself was quite skeptical of this. When one devotee told Srila Prabhupada, Prabhupada, I am feeling very lusty. And I think, some lusty ghost has possessed me. And that is what is making me feel lusty. So Prabhupada said, no, there's no ghost over here. It is your own lusty conditioning that has come up. So it's not that as followers of scripture, we try to go for supernatural explanations when natural explanations are there. No, if natural explanations are sufficient for a particular phenomena, we accept those natural explanations. And as devotees also, we should not think that every psychological problem is caused by ghosts. No, if there are normal causes, we accept those normal causes. But there are many psychological problems which people face which are not explainable in terms of normal phenomena. Especially, rather than attributing psychological problems to ghosts, there are well documented evidences of very different personality and different behavior from people. So I'm just sharing on the screen PowerPoint presentation about ghosts. This is a full seminar. I won't go into the seminar right now, but I'm just sharing some slides which explain how ghosts come and what exactly happens when ghosts haunt a person. Okay, so what sort of phenomena can be attributed to ghosts? There are certain times when a person starts behaving in an entirely different way. There are well documented events, there are well documented cases where people have behaved in ways that are drastically different from the normal ways. So, for example, there is a well documented case of a person who was born in France and he had never been out of France, and suddenly he started speaking in Swahili. And none of his relatives knew Swahili, and initially his relatives thought that he's just blabbering some nonsense. But later on they found that he's speaking Swahili, and he was speaking meaningful and fluent Swahili. And there was just no way he could have spoken Swahili, because he had never learned Swahili, he had never met anyone who had spoken Swahili, and yet he spoke that language and spoke it fluently. So here there is no normal explanation that is available. And there are many respectable scientists who have studied the paranormal, as it is called. And when they study the paranormal, they have come up with much well documented evidence for the existence of things that science cannot explain. So here I am sharing a quote by Alfred Wallace. So Alfred Wallace was a co-founder of the theory of evolution along with Charles Darwin, and he also studied the paranormal. And he writes in his book over here, in his autobiography, My Life, a Record of Events and Opinions, he outlines how the evidence forced him to give up his anti-ghost bias. Anti-ghost bias means most people think ghosts don't exist. So he also believed like that. So he writes over here, the majority of people have been brought up in belief that miracles, ghosts, and the whole series of strange phenomena here described cannot exist. That they are contrary to the laws of nature, that they are the superstitions of a bygone age, and that therefore they are necessarily either impostures or delusions. There is no place in the fabric of their thoughts into which such facts can be fitted. When I first began this inquiry, it was the same with myself. The facts did not fit into my brain into my then existing fabric of thought. All my preconceptions, all my knowledge, all my belief in the supremacy of science and of natural laws were against the possibility of such phenomena. And even when one by one the facts were forced upon me without possibility of escape from them, still, spirit was the last thing I could give into. Every other possible solution was tried and rejected. And very significant statement here. It says, we ask our readers not for belief, but for doubt of their own infallibility on this question. That means he's saying, I don't ask you to believe me. He's saying, I only ask you to have the doubt. Maybe my own opinion might be wrong. Maybe I am not infallible. Maybe there's a possibility that my understanding might be incorrect. We ask for inquiry and patient experiment before hastily concluding that we are all of us mere dupes and idiots, as regards the subject to which we have devoted our best mental faculties and power of observation for many years. So like that there are many people, Alfred Wallace is just one of the scientists. There are many other scientists like this who also have talked about the existence of ghosts. Now can you see this diagram here? There are three levels of being we can see. There is the soul, the subtle body, and there is the gross body. So you can see here the soul, the subtle body, and the gross body. This is the normal way a person lives. Now when a person becomes a ghost, then what happens? So the gross body is dead on the departure of the soul, and then the soul along with the subtle body leaves. So when the soul and the subtle body leave and then they don't get a new body, that disembodied existence is called the ghost. And now this ghost can possess someone. So how does that happen? So this is a normal person, and this is the soul, and this is a subtle body. But when a ghost possesses a person, what happens? A ghost enters into that body. So there is here the soul, and here there is the subtle body of that soul. This is the ghost. So the possessed person becomes suppressed, sidelined, dominated, and the possessing ghost becomes the central person. And when that's why now what has happened? The person who has been possessed, he himself is now sidelined, and the ghost who has possessed, he takes control of the person, and that person starts speaking and acting through that person, through its host. So that's why, so in the case of a French person suddenly speaking Swahili, there is no normal explanation available. As Alfred Wallace said, that every possible explanation was tried and rejected as not workable, not applicable. And then the most satisfactory explanation about how a person who is French suddenly starts speaking Swahili and fluent Swahili is that a ghost has entered into that person's body, and now that ghost who knows Swahili, who knew Swahili in his previous life, is now possessed this body and is speaking through this body. And that's why many times when a ghost possesses a person, that ghost stays for a particular time, and when the ghost goes away, the person comes back to normal, and this normal person, this is documented by Alfred Wallace, that this Frenchman after some time just started speaking French, and he had no knowledge of Swahili. In fact, when others told him that you are speaking Swahili fluently, he couldn't even understand when others spoke Swahili, what to speak of himself speak Swahili. So in such cases, when there is no normal explanation that is applicable, then we can consider a paranormal explanation such as ghosts. So the normal and paranormal explanations are not contradictory. When the normal explanations are not satisfactory, then the paranormal explanation can be accepted as the most satisfactory explanation. Thank you. Am I audible to you? Am I audible to you?
It's audible.
Okay, fine, okay. Stephen Hawking is trying to come up with a theory of everything which can explain every other theory. Does it already exist in the Vedas? Answer: actually, Stephen Hawking has himself admitted that a theory of everything is extremely elusive. Although in his book The Grand Design, he purports to offer a particular theory as a theory of everything, but if you critically investigate the theory, it is definitely not a theory of everything, because it assumes a lot of things. For example, he says, for example, his theory will explain how something came from nothing, or how the world came from nothing. But then, if you look at what his conception of nothing is, then it is definitely not nothing. He assumes that things begin with a complex quantum mechanical vacuum, and that complex quantum mechanical vacuum requires pages and pages of abstract mathematics to describe. So it is definitely something, it is not nothing. So when he says that there is a theory of everything, actually conditions apply. Whatever he says is a theory of everything is a theory of everything, provided this were true. And there are not only religious scientists, but many secular scientists have also strongly critiqued Stephen Hawking's idea of the theory of everything, because it assumes a lot of things, it involves a lot of speculations, and it is definitely not a theory of everything, because it requires a lot of some things here and there and there and there for it to explain what it claims to explain. So theory of everything. In fact, Stephen Hawking in 2004, he had been working for years to try to develop a theory of everything. And because of the recent movie the biopic about his life, he has become more associated in the public imagination with the theory of everything. But he himself admitted in around 2004-2005, he said that, I am pleased to announce that humanity's quest for knowledge will never end. Now what does that mean? Means you remove the spin doctoring from that, and what it essentially means is, he's saying, I am pleased to announce that humanity will forever stay ignorant. Now is that something to be pleased about? So theory of everything is not something that science is coming anywhere close to. In fact, the more science is studied, there are two fundamental pillars of science, that is quantum physics and relativity, and both of these are violently contradictory. Quantum physics proposes that nothing exists except waves, whereas relativity requires the existence of particles. Now, these theories, there is just no way to reconcile them. And the more these theories are being studied, the more the distance between them is found to be more and more. So although scientists have been talking about a theory of everything since 1980, but the more they study, Steven Weinberg is one of the world's most prominent atheistic scientists, and he said that although we have made great progress in physics over the last few decades, he says the more progress we make, or the more knowledge we acquire, the further we seem from the solution, because quantum physics and relativity seem to be further and further apart. So science, neither Stephen Hawking nor the general body of scientists are anywhere close to the theory of everything. Now, is there a theory of everything already existing in the Vedas? Now, sometimes some devotees may simplistically say that, okay, Krishna is the theory of everything, the Hare Krishna Mahamantra is the theory of everything, or something like that. But the important point to recognize is that saying that there is a theory of everything assumes a particular worldview. That worldview is that the universe is nothing more than a mechanism or a machine. The theory is, if we use the word theory in the scientific sense, the word theory can be used in a non-scientific sense also, but if it is to be used in a scientific sense, it assumes everything to be mechanistic. That means there should be nothing which has free will, and everything should act according to the laws of nature. Then we can postulate a theory about how things happen. But if within existence there is something which has free will, there is something which has consciousness, then we can understand that the theory of everything then the theory of everything will not apply, because if the universe is not reducible to reducible to unconscious matter, but the universe has irreducibly consciousness. Then consciousness will act according to its own free will. Consciousness will not act according to any specific mathematical or mechanical theory. So that's why the idea that there can be a theory of everything assumes a materialistic worldview, and the Vedas don't accept a materialistic worldview. They say that there are two irreducible realities in this world, that is matter and spirit. And both of them come ultimately from Krishna, ultimately from God, who manifests in his highest manifestation as Krishna. So because God manifests, because there is consciousness, which is an irreducible living, which is irreducible fact of existence, so we cannot have a mechanical or a mathematical theory to explain all the observations in the universe. So yes, the Vedas ultimately describe that the cause of everything is God and God's will. So if you want to say in that absolute sense, in that non-technical sense of the word theory, then we can say that yes, the theory of everything in the Vedas is that God is the supreme controller and nothing happens without his will. Maya adhyakshena prakriti suyate sacharacharam hetunanena kaunte jagad viparivartate. That everything happens under my supervision and all changes happen under material nature, which is under my supervision. So God's absolute control and God's sanction is the basis of everything that exists and everything that happens. So in that sense, in that non-mechanical, non-reductionistic, non-mathematical sense, we can say that God and God's will are the ultimate explanation for everything. But not only is science nowhere near finding a theory of everything, but a theory of everything itself is not possible, because there is no the assumption underlying the idea that there can be a theory of everything, that the universe is mechanistic, material and reductionistic, that assumption itself is flawed. Thank you. Okay. Question: if the soul doesn't require food, then why in the spiritual world people have honey instead of water, foods, also new dishes prepared by Radharani, so Satchit Anand, the body requires food? Answer: the soul does not require food. In the spiritual world, whatever is done is for the sake of Leela. It is for the sake of reciprocation of love. So Krishna does not need food and Radharani does not need to cook food for Krishna. But through practical actions, love is reciprocated. And Radharani wants to express her love for Krishna, and Krishna wants to accept the love of Radharani and reciprocate with her love. That's why Radharani or Yashodamai cook for Krishna, and then Krishna is the food. So in the spiritual world, there is nothing that is driven by necessity. Necessity means without that, there will be death or there will be destruction. In the spiritual world, nothing is driven by necessity. Everything is motivated by love. And a simple example to illustrate this, we say that in the description of the spiritual world, one common thread is that there are kalpa vruksha trees. There are desire fulfilling trees which can give whatever we desire. And yet, you will, in no pastime of Krishna with the gopis or Krishna with Yashodamai, will we see the gopis or Yashodamai telling the kalpa vruksha, Krishna wants gulab jamun, please provide gulab jamun. No, Yashodamai or Krishna, Radharani, they will cook themselves for Krishna. The kalpa vruksha are there to offer the facility. Then why do Radharani or Yashodamai cook for Krishna? Because they want to express their love for him. So even from the spiritual world's own perspective, although there is no necessity for cooking because the kalpa vruksha trees can readily offer everything, still the devotees cook because they want to express their love for Krishna, and the way to express love is by doing service. So it's not that the soul needs food, not that the spiritual body need anything for its existence, But the purpose of the spiritual world and everything in the spiritual world is the reciprocation of love. And the reciprocation of love is done through the cooking of food, the offering of food, and the consuming of food. Thank you. Question. I have heard that scriptures have explanations of theory of relativity and quantum physics. Is it that scriptures have mathematical equations for it? Answer. Scripture has a different way of looking at things from the way of modern science. So we cannot mix two models together and try to draw concepts from here to there. For example, if we consider medicine, say consider two branches of medicine or two modes of treatment, allopathy and Ayurveda. Now, allopathy has a particular way of analyzing the body and Ayurveda has a different way of analyzing the body. Ayurveda considers the bodily health as dependent on the balance of kapha, vata and pitta, and certain diseases it may attribute to excessive heat in the body. Now, if you turn towards allopathy, there is no such concept as heat in the body in allopathy. Yes, they say sometimes acidity has increased in the body, something like that might be there. But the whole concept of heat that is there in Ayurveda, that is not there in allopathy. And yet, both systems work. Ayurveda has cured many people for thousands of years in India, and allopathy also cures many people all over the world. So now, it is not that one is right and the other is wrong. These two are different models. And just because there is no concept of heat in allopathy, if an allopath says that the whole Ayurvedic model is wrong, that allopath is being narrow-minded, is being unintelligent. And similarly, if an Ayurvedic practitioner, Ayurvedic doctor says that because allopathy does not have any such basic concept as heat, bodily heat, so allopathy is useless. The allopath is also wrong over there. We cannot crisscross and drag concepts from one way of look, one model to another, one approach to study of a subject into another approach to study of subject. And this applies not just to medicine, it also applies to physics. As I said earlier, that quantum physics and relativity are themselves violently contradictory. And in their fundamental postulates, they don't agree. So then which theory do scientists use? They are just pragmatic, whichever works. So if for a particular set of particular situation, if quantum theory works, they use quantum theory. If for a particular situation relativity works, they use relativity. And they don't stop using relativity or quantum physics just because it doesn't agree with the other theory. They understand these are different approaches to study the universe, and the universe is very complex and we don't know what it is. But these are models which help us to understand to some extent and to use that understanding in a practical way. So similarly, when we say that, say, the concept of relativity is there in scripture. When we talk about relativity in scripture, that is not exactly the same as the theory of relativity within physics, because it's a different model. As I said, modern physics has developed with largely a mechanistic conception of the universe, where there is no room for consciousness and the whole universe is seen simply as the interaction of insentient particles acting according to impersonal laws. Whereas the Vedic worldview is that there is not just matter, but there is also consciousness. And consciousness also shapes the interaction of matter. So because there are different models for looking at reality, so we cannot crisscross and mishmash. So when it is said that in scripture there is this reference to relativity, what it essentially means is that there is the concept of relativity of time, which was one of the defining characteristics of the theory of relativity as proposed by Einstein. So for example, Einstein, to explain to a layman about how time is relative, he gave the example that time flows relatively. He says if you are attending a boring lecture, the time say that 1 hour seems to be very long time. And he using a materialistic example. He said if you are with a beautiful girl, 1 hour seems to be like 1 minute. So now this is if we actually go into Einstein's theory of relativity, it's a imprecise, non-mathematical, layman explanation of what is a complex theory. So similarly, when it is said that in scripture also there is a mention of relativity, that is not a mathematical correlation. It is a non-technical correlation. So for example, it is said that just as Einstein said that time flows differently at different places. So similarly, the scriptures also say that in earth time flows at a particular rate and time flows much slower in the higher realms. So for example, in Brahmaloka, time flows much slower. And one moment in Brahmaloka may be several generations on earth. And in that sense, the fundamental concept of relativity is talked about in the Vedas, and that is also talked about in the theory developed within materialist science, which is called as theory of relativity. So although the same concept is there to some extent, but the whole assumption of worldview along with which this concept comes, they are different, and that's why we cannot crisscross. And although there is Vedic mathematics which is used for analyzing the world extensively, scripture itself does not focus on mathematics as the gold standard in understanding or analyzing knowledge. And that's why the concept of relativity, yes, there is some mathematical postulation of it. Say for example, the one moment on earth, how much, or one moment on Brahmaloka, how much time will it be on earth? There is some mathematical description of that. That is description of how much time earth according to earth scale correlates with how much time according to Brahma scale. So that mathematical correlation is there. But the way we do mathematical equations, that is a particular approach within a particular model of reality. And because the scriptures offer us a different model of reality, these two models don't intermesh. Thank you. Okay. Question. As you told that science uses pre-existing mechanisms, how this can be explained in case of computer codes and programming? Yeah. I didn't say that science cannot further modify or tap or utilize pre-existing mechanisms and modify them to some extent. Just like even I give the example of a farmer. A farmer will use, or a fruit farmer or orchard runner maybe use mango seed. But even in the traditional culture, there are some forms of plant interbreeding and fruit harvestation, by which sometimes you can get a small mango, sometimes you can get a big mango, sometimes you can get a slightly different color mango. So plant interbreeding was one of the skills that one of the 64 skills that Krishna learned thousands of years ago when he descended on this world. That's what the Bhagavata mentions. That means that ability to process or modify the pre-existing mechanism in nature, that to some extent is present before also. Yes, when we same applies to our generation of computer codes or our programming. What I am talking about is something more fundamental. Yes, we may write some codes, but the capacity for those codes to be utilized, that itself requires certain functionality. For example, if the semiconductor effect would not have been there, then we would have practically no electronic technology. And even if we wrote computer codes, the computer codes would not be functional. They would not have any environment in which to function. So, now if we consider the hierarchy, there are three fundamental truths in existence. What is Upanishads call it Tattvatraya. There is the Jagat, there is the Jiva, and there is the Jagdish. So Jagat is matter, Jiva is consciousness, and Jagdish is the Supreme Lord. So now these three, Jagdish, Jiva and Jagat, these three are fundamental truths of existence. Among these three, the Jagat is insentient. Jagat is unconscious. And Jiva is conscious. And the Jagdish is supreme conscious. So because the Jiva is superior to Jagat, in the sense that the Jiva is conscious, Jagat is not conscious. So Jiva has the capacity to modify and alter, change matter to some extent. And that is the capacity which is there present because of consciousness. And spirituality does not deny this ability or reject this ability. Spirituality simply tells us that we have the capacity to control matter, but control it in a way that will be spiritually constructive, that will further our inner growth. So for example, we have the power of speaking. So now I can use my power of speech to speak about mundane subject matters, to speak about sense gratification, to propagate atheism. Or I can use my power of speech to speak about Krishna and myself go closer towards Krishna and take others closer to Krishna. So either way, I will have the ability to control and move my tongue and my speech mechanism in a particular way. How I use it will vary. So scripture itself acknowledges the fact that we have the capacity to control nature to some extent. And it doesn't deny that ability, it urges us to use that ability in a harmonious way. So yes, so from that philosophical perspective, we do have the capacity to modify things in nature, and we can write computer codes and programs for modifying things in nature. But the capacity for those computer codes and programs to create further modifications that require certain pre-existing arrangements in nature which we have not created. And those pre-existing arrangements are ultimately by the arrangement of God. We are going to be engineers or scientists, and we do research based on some theories. So, should we not have some faith at all in science? Answer: no one said that we have to reject science per se. If anybody has said that, that's a misunderstanding. The problem comes when science goes beyond its jurisdiction and makes claims about which science cannot know for sure. I'll give a simple example, then explain the point. Suppose your mother cooks a cake for you, a grand cake, and then she offers the cake to you. And now, as far as you know, it's not your birthday, or it's not her birthday. There's no special occasion for that birthday cake. Now, if you decide, I want to find out why my mother made this cake for me, and you decide to call the world's best scientists. You can call physicists, you can call chemists, you can call neurologists, you can call psychiatrists, you can call biologists, you call all different best scientists in the world, and let them observe that cake as much as they want, study that cake as much as they want, process that cake as much as they want. At the end of it all, by studying the cake, can they come to know why your mother made that cake? They may give you phenomenal knowledge about the composition of the cake, the ingredients of the cake. They may even be able to tell how the cake was made by testing some of the samples. But they will not be able to tell why the cake was made. Now, to find out why that cake was made, you will just have to ask your mother. And your mother may say, 25 years ago, on this day, you developed your first tooth. And when I was feeding you my breast milk, that was the first time you bit me. And to commemorate that day, I wanted to create something soft, make something soft and delicious for you. That's why I made this cake. So now, even if you get the most brilliant Nobel laureate in the world, that Nobel laureate will not be able to tell you this reason. Nobel laureate scientist, I mean. This is just outside the jurisdiction of science. So, it's not that we have to reject science, but we have to reject science when it makes extra scientific claims. Claims about claims about subjects that are just beyond the jurisdiction of science. Then science runs into errors, and that the jurisdiction of science has limitations is acknowledged even by scientists. Here I am sharing a quote by an eminent physicist. So this is a quote from Nobel laureate physicist Erwin Schrödinger. I am very astonished that the scientific picture of the real world around me is very deficient. It gives a lot of factual information, puts all our experience in a magnificently consistent order, but it is ghastly silent about all and sundry that is really near to our heart, that really matters to us. It cannot tell us a word about red and blue, bitter and sweet, physical pain and physical delight. It knows nothing of beautiful and ugly, good or bad, God and eternity. Science sometimes pretends to answer questions in these domains, but the answers are very often so silly that we are not inclined to take them seriously. See, this is not a person who has no faith in science. This is a Nobel laureate scientist, Schrödinger, who most of you know from the Schrödinger's equation in quantum physics. So he is a person who is an eminent scientist, who is a champion of science, and yet he is acknowledging that the scientific picture of the real world around me is very deficient. So it's not that we should give up faith in science, rather we should give up faith in the absolute truth claims of science. We should not unquestioningly accept those claims of science which are beyond its jurisdiction. So as I said, when science talks about origin, I started originally by talking about origin, how science cannot do experiments, so it's only an inference to best explanation, it's abduction. Then I talked about values, about how science can tell by putting arsenic in your grandmother's breakfast, you can get your inheritance, but whether you should do it or not, science cannot tell that. Einstein said that we can have moral foundations of science, but we cannot have the scientific foundations of morality. And further, I talked about purpose. Now, why the mother made the cake, science cannot tell us. So science can answer the how questions, mechanism questions. Science cannot answer the why questions. The purpose questions, science cannot answer. And that's what he says. And now he's actually going beyond that and he's saying further things. Now what does he mean here, Schrödinger, when he says, it cannot tell us a word about red and blue, bitter and sweet, physical delight and physical pain. What does he mean? We may say that See, red and blue as colors can be understood or measured through chromatics, through science. But the experience of red and blue, that cannot be explained through science. If something is beautiful and something is ugly, that judgment, that cannot be done by science. A camera can record a movie very precisely, but if the Oscar awards are to be given, the camera cannot decide whom to give the Oscar award. That has to be decided by an expert panel. So science has its utility and it has tremendous power within its jurisdiction. But when science starts making claims about origin, it starts making claims about value, it starts making claims about purpose, it goes beyond its jurisdiction. And when it goes beyond its jurisdiction, then the answers that it gives are, as he says, they are often, we are not inclined to take them seriously. They are often so silly that we are not inclined to take them seriously. I'll give two further examples of what I mean by science having limits to its jurisdiction. Science can tell us when a person has dreams. When a person is sleeping, then by REM, the rapid eye movement, science can tell us, okay, the person is dreaming right now. But if we want to know what that person is dreaming, no matter how sophisticated be our sensor, we cannot find out the content of the dream by that. We want to know that there is only one way, wake up that person and ask the person. So, science cannot know the subjective realm of individual experience. It can know the quantifiable effects of that experience on material things, but it cannot know the content of the experience itself. Or for that matter, the whole field of medical science, one of its primary purposes is to reduce pain. It is to reduce pain. But science in and of itself cannot tell us cannot itself measure pain. Now, there may be some pain scale on which the extent of the physical damage that correlates with level of pain can be tabulated. But the experience of pain is a subjective experience that cannot be quantified. If somebody tells you I am angry, imagine the situation. There's a world's top brain surgeon. He knows in and out of the brain. He has got some of the best sensors in the world for studying the brain. And he comes home. And he's upset. He finds that his wife is upset with him. And she's looking furious with red cheeks and wide eyes and clenched teeth and clenched fists. And suppose he says, darling, just let me get my brain scan. I'll scan your brain and find out what's wrong. She will take that same brain scanning device and bash his brain with it. The point here is that science has its valid jurisdiction of knowledge, and even in our day-to-day experience, as well as our inference, we can know that there are many things which cannot be known through science. The realm of subjective experience, the realm of emotions, that is something which is beyond science. So when we talk about the spirituality, it is not that we are saying we should reject science and have no faith in science. It is rather that we should reject the non-scientific truth claims of science. When science makes claims that are beyond its jurisdiction, that's what we should reject. And this particular idea, when science makes claims beyond its jurisdiction, that is called as scientism. It is not science, it is scientism. That means scientism holds that scientism is a belief system that holds that science is the only source of reliable knowledge. And all knowledge that is not scientific is not reliable. Now, scientism is not science. It is a philosophy. It is a belief system. And it is different from science. So what spirituality requires is not the rejection of science, but the rejection of scientism. The rejection of the belief system that science can provide us absolute knowledge about everything. Thank you. Okay. So, in the case of ghosts, which soul will control the body? How can it be explained? What is the behavior of the body having two souls in a single body? Is it possible? Answer: normally there is not just one soul in the body, there are innumerable souls in the body. How is that? There are many germs in the body, and each of those germs is also a soul with its own body. But when we talk about a specific case of possession means that there is a soul comes into the body which does not have its own body. So all those germs, they are souls, but those are souls with their own bodies. Whereas when a ghost comes into the body, the ghost possesses or takes over that body. Now, how can there be two souls in one body, or which soul will control? Normally, most people feel ghosts to be very frightening creatures. Now, sometimes in movies they may show that suddenly the door opens and nobody is there, or suddenly the windows start knocking, or people hear some eerie sounds, and it creates a scary sort of situation. So ghosts are often depicted as frightening creatures, and yes, they can be frightening, but also ghosts are not just frightening creatures, they are also frustrated creatures. Why are ghosts frustrated? Because they don't have bodies with which they can function in the world. Imagine if in your home there is a big festival, and in that there is a big celebration, and there is a big feast, and at that time your stomach gets severely upset. So everybody else is eating a feast and you have to eat soup. You'll be miserable. So the situation of ghosts is like that. Now they have the subtle body, the mind, which has desires in it, and those desires do act, those desires do influence others. That means that those desires actually lead, they have those desires, they want to fulfill those desires, but they have no capacity to fulfill those desires because they don't have a tongue with which to eat. So when they are so frustrated, in their frustration, they may sometimes try some drastic means by which to fulfill their desires. And some such drastic mean is possessing some other body. So now souls live in tamoguna. Ghosts. Ghosts flourish in tamoguna, the mode of ignorance. And then if some people are living tamasically, they have a lot of intoxication, they live very unclean lives, stooped in ignorance, then they make themselves vulnerable to attacks by the ghosts. And when they are attacked by ghosts, then the ghosts possess them and use their body to fulfill their own desires. So a ghost may enter a particular person because that person wants to eat something or enjoy something or communicate something or do something, and that person uses the ghost's body. So the ghost uses that person's body to do its activity. And after doing that activity, the ghost will itself go away. So yes, because ghosts have power in tamoguna, and souls who live in tamoguna, they make themselves sometimes vulnerable to attack by ghosts. That's how ghosts can enter into a body and take control of that body and act accordingly, and make that body act according to their own will instead of the will of the original person, whose body it is. And when the ghosts are able to fulfill their desire, or when some other special experts come and exorcise those ghosts, exorcise means drive away the ghosts, then that time the ghosts go away, and the normal person or the soul in the body gains control, and then that person starts behaving normally. Thank you. So now there are several other questions. Most of these questions have been answered on my website, thespiritualscientist.com. So Kirti Gopal Prabhu, I suggest that you can look for the answers on Spiritual Scientist. I think 90% of the remaining questions have been answered there. A few, if they are not answered, I'll answer them in a few days. And then you can share the links with the devotees. Thank you very much. Shri Prabhupada ki jai. Gaur Bhakta Vrinda ki Nitai Gaur Premanande. Thank you very much.